And now I'm happy to introduce Isabelle Deconinck. Isabelle is a fiction writer whose work has been published in 5 Points, Epiphany, KGB Bartlett, and World Literature Today. She was nominated for 2 Pushcart Prizes and is the recipient of 3 fellowships at the Helene Wurlitzer Foundation in Taos, New Mexico. Isabelle earned a BA in French literature from the Sorbonne and 2 masters in this country. She works as a press agent for the performing arts and teaches writing and migration at the School of Visual Arts and tutorial and craft at the Writer's Studio. She's currently working on a novel in which she hopes to put to rest her complicated relationship with France. Please welcome Isabelle Deconinck.
Okay, I'm going to read 2 fragments from the first chapter of a novel in progress, which is still in search of a title. Francine hasn't returned to France, the country of her birth, for 20 years. And now that she steps into the hot mouth of the Delta Airbus, she's thinking of not going. Stale air is left over from a previous transatlantic flight, which the roaring air conditioner hasn't managed to dissipate yet, and French voices are rising from inside the cabin, prickling her skin like pins. "Madame," shouts a stewardess, too much red on her cheeks and planted at the door like a traffic enforcement agent. "You need to move." Francine makes her way down the aisle until the window seat she ordered online 2 weeks ago. A young man is sitting in it, snapping pictures through the porthole, although all Francine can see are men in bright orange vests, sending pieces of luggage crashing onto a moving belt. She's relieved to have kept her bag. "Sir?" She yanks the boarding pass from between her teeth and waves it to the stranger. "It's my seat." "Sure." He gets up like he's doing her a favor. There is a future bubbling inside him. His swaying mass of curly hair and t-shirt boasting "I'm awesome," which yesterday only would have made her nervous. Today, she's grateful for this young man not to be her compatriot, so her French re-immersion can be postponed for a few hours. She'll be sitting next to an American. She hauls her bag up into the overhead bin and slides her body, the small, narrow-hipped body of a teenager, rather than the 49-year-old woman she is, towards the window. Soon, the view will be a pitch-black night, she knows that. But when the sun rises again on the other side of the Atlantic, she wants to see what's coming her way. Once in her chair, Francine draws a finger across her sweaty forehead, like one checks the dust over a piece of furniture left unattended for too long. Then she stares at the 2 white lines her bag has dug into her palm, wondering if the circulation will ever return. When she left France, how much she had wished to leave her clumsy, unlovable self behind. Now, she'd like to dispose of this body like a suitcase, store it into the overhead, or, even better, roll it like a used piece of clothing and hurl it through the porthole back to America. "Seatbelt, please." The voice of the stewardess startles Francine, who might have fallen had there been any room to fall. She turns to her neighbor. "Did you take my seatbelt?" "Nope." After a few turns and lifts, she realizes she's sitting on it. Once buckled up, all she wants is to undo the buckle. She doesn't want to be attached to a seat. She wants to leave, the plane that is. There is still time. Of course, it means to ask her neighbor to get up again. And this elderly Japanese man who is now occupying the aisle seat, she could jump over both of them. She thinks she has the strength. She definitely has the strength to shove to the side this French tourist clogging the corridor so she can reach the door before the stewardess shuts it. The cabin light turned off, and the plane starts moving on the tarmac. Francine has done none of the things she's dreamed of doing, but there are a lot of things Francine has dreamed of and has not done, and she closes her eyes. Shortly after, the plane takes off. It's March 2017. Donald Trump has been elected President of the United States, and Francine is finally returning to France to visit her family, unless the plane crashes. Which she wouldn't mind, but the plane doesn't crash. It keeps ascending into the pale wintry sky, plastering her shoulders against a seat which smells of all the hair that rested on it before her. At one point, the plane makes a sharp turn, and Francine opens her eyes just in time to see, in the fading pink horizon, the dented skyline of Manhattan releasing like a jaw. It's 2 hours later, and the plane is flying over the coast of Canada when lights flood back into the cabin, crude and blinding. A stewardess comes down the aisle, lugging a large metallic cart from which she extracts individual trays. Neglected since lunch, Francine's stomach wakes up with a growl. Chicken or risotto? Risotto, Francine replies, not because she prefers it, but because in this world of crazed antibiotic feeding, risotto seems safer. She rips the cover of the white container. Steam rises from a mushy rice, sprinkled with colorful particles, the origin of which isn't immediately obvious. What's in it? Francine asked. Rice? I mean, inside the rice. I don't know. The stewardess frowns. Would you rather have chicken? Francine collects the sickly loaf of bread, a piece of cheese of a dubious yellow, and a red cake with a list of ingredients the length of its slice. She would have added the risotto if her stomach hadn't protested with a sharp contraction. I can't eat these, she says. She passes the items to the stewardess, who has no hands to take anything back, and answers cheerily, I hear the strawberry cake is delicious. You see, Francine continues, I have cancer, and I won't eat sugar, dairy, gluten, fried or processed food, or anything feeding my cancer or creating more inflammation. That includes things I don't know what's inside. She catches her breath like she's run a half marathon. She's done it again, sharing the news of her cancer with a complete stranger, this time a Delta employee with 1 week's sleep deprivation hanging below her eyes and flesh sagging from the too tight sleeves of her girly uniform. That's how it's been since she was diagnosed 2 months ago. She's turned into a bucket of polluted water, spilling the overflow onto whomever happens to be there. So far, she's spilled it onto the postman, 2 cab drivers, and the Mexican man from the corner deli. She's been careful not to leak the news to people she works with, for fear jobs will no longer come, and she hasn't said a word of it to her family she's going to meet. Well, honey, the stewardess finally says, you just leave what you can't eat and keep fighting. She might have patted Francine on the back, where Francine on the aisle, but she isn't. The stewardess moves to the next row of passengers, and Francine pokes her plastic fork into her risotto, wondering why she feels lonelier than before. Can I have it? Her neighbor is pointing at the discarded food. I guess so. He grabs everything she doesn't want, then asks in a slowly articulated French, Vous êtes française? Me? Francine mumbles, even though she heard perfectly. You have an accent. I'm afraid I can't get rid of it, she says, still in English. He doesn't wait to swallow before speaking, and bread becomes lodged inside his cheek, forming a bump. But it's such a beautiful accent. Francine recoils inside her seat like a snail. Is she supposed to speak French now? She's been on American soil for so long, she forgets she has an accent. Then it strikes her. This presumption of accents to work ahead of you. So it's the first thing people notice, while cancer operate beneath the surface of things incognito, at least at the beginning. Both are trying to define her. The accent from the outside and cancer from the inside, and Francine trusts neither of them. Yes, she says, mildly aggressive. I'm French and I have cancer. Yeah, I heard. Although you don't look like someone who has cancer. She wants to ask him what she should look like, but she knows. She's seen those emaciated, translucent bodies at the infusion center, solitary tufts of hair dangling from their bare skulls, navigating between chairs of the waiting room like deer in the headlights. The drugs I'm taking don't make you lose your hair, if it's what you mean. Well, that's good, and he stuffs his mouth with a second slice of cake. Left alone, Francine asks herself if there are such things as French cancers and American cancers, because if there are, hers must be French. Coming from this French self, still tugging at her after years of voluntary exile, unless hers is American. After all, she got cancer in this country, this land of dreams which turned out not to be so promising. These past weeks, the news of her illness has supplanted every bit of news about Trump's election, and the glass cage where she now lives serves only to reverberate her own catastrophe, the greatest of all. But when she wakes up at 3 a.m., now a regular occurrence, she can easily believe she's been sucked into a spiral of world catastrophes. Her body is a country, her cells its citizens, and she can't stop the march of the greedy ones. What's happening to America is happening to her own body, and she isn't even American. Food has lodged again in her neighbor's cheek, a lump breathing like a living entity, and Francine suddenly feels the strong urge to punch it. Trust me, I have cancer, she says at last. They both fall silent for a while, the young man heartily finishing his second meal, and Francine grudgingly sucking on her gluey rice with a concentration which begs for no disturbance. When she is done, she pulls out the Sky Mall magazine and flips through pages of gadgets, each bearing the reward of a happier life, none offering relief from the epidemic of cancer. She tucks the magazine back into its net and pushes her weight into her seat in hopes it will recline lower than what it's been programmed, but it does not. Thank you.